Hey, what's up? Gary here. Need help getting started with mixers and splitters on your Quad Cortex? Let's go check it out. So let's have a brief primer on splitters and mixers on the Quad Cortex, okay? So splitters and mixers are essentially going to allow you to split the signal chain of a given row that you're working with, okay? So in this case on the Quad Cortex, you could have two pairs of them, two splitter mixer combos, okay? Splitter mixer A, or 1, is going to be between rows 1 and 2, and splitter mixer combo 2 is going to be between rows 3 and 4. And that's because rows 2 and 4, okay, are meant to be complementary rows that are allowing for splitters and mixers to mix in other devices, virtual device blocks in order to be able to manipulate the sound that you're getting. And you can use it in a number of different ways. We're going to go through all the different scenarios in a minute about how you can do that. But I want to give you just a brief touch up on what splitters and mixers actually mean, okay? So splitting the input signal. A splitter allows you to have two different lanes of that signal, okay? The lane A is always going to be the row that you're manipulating. So in the case of row 1, lane A on a splitter, if I create one, is going to continue that signal chain through the entirety of the row. That's always going to happen. So you're never, with a splitter or mixer, stopping the output of that flow from the row that you're manipulating with the splitter, okay? What you're doing is you're actually taking a branch of that same exact sound, right? And you're duplicating it to the next row down. So that way you can manipulate that sound further and mix it either to its own separate output or mix it back into the source signal chain that it originally came from, modified with whatever device blocks have been modifying that sound on the row below, and then putting it above and going to an output as well. Okay, so that's your two different scenarios of which you can work with to make that happen. Now we're going to go through how to create splitters and mixers in a moment, but I do want to show you just a brief look at being able to create one. So if I hover over the icons here in Cortex Control, you'll notice this blue S, okay? And it's only available on lanes 2 and 4. If you remember what I just mentioned to you, you can only have 2 sets of splitters and mixers, right? And it's always going to be a complement of rows 1 and row 3 in tune with, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You can't have a splitter, okay, go to row 3 or row 4 from row 2. It can only be manipulating row 1. You see that? It's the only place it'll let it. Same with row 4. If I try to drag this up and do something up into this area, it can't. You only have 2 sets, and they can only work with these 2 sets of these chains, okay? So this is what you get out of Cortex Control. Now, if you're looking at my actual Cortex as it sits right now, you don't see these little icons. They don't exist there. You have to long press in order to be able to start the process of getting the dialogue to go create one. But it's really the same. And we're going to go through a couple of differences of where maybe the interface differs slightly, but the results are the same. If you're splitting here, you're just simply being able to take a copy of this input signal chain, manipulate it on the next row down, and then have some way to be able to mix it back into that existing lane to be able to get it out the rest of the signal chain or send it out to a separate output. Let's now take a look at creating a splitter and mixer combo, okay? And in this case, we're going to create one on lane 2 to complement lane 1 on the grid. So I'm going to first show you that there is a few different ways of which you can go about creating splitters and mixers, okay? And it depends on what you're using. So I'm going to start with the device, and then I'm going to come back over to Cortex Control so I can show you, because there is a difference in the way that the interface is going to look. And I want to make sure that you understand kind of how you go about unlocking some of these things as you progress, okay? So first of all, if you long press on lane 2 on any place where you would expect a device block to be, okay, it's going to bring up the interface for splitter. And you're going to notice in looking at this that you have different options here, especially parameters, first and foremost for splitter. However, everything is grayed out. You can't actually use it. And the reason why is because you need to tell the device the placement of where you want the splitter first before you're allowed to be able to have some of the parameters that you can modify. Okay. Now there's quick shortcuts. There's 2 of them to show common elements of the way that you would create a splitter. Either this first one, which would have you splitting the signal chain input from lane 1 and then ending the signal chain output, okay, for that that splitter, that secondary leg of that split to lane B. So what I mean by that is if you choose this scenario, okay, you're going to continue to have the signal progress across all of lane 1, but wherever you place that splitter in between any of these device blocks, you're going to take a copy of that input and be able to modify it as you see fit across this secondary device lane, and then ultimately have the output come out something else at the end of lane 2, okay, while still sending out of lane 1. Now, if you select the second one that has this kind of U shape that does this, okay, you're going to take that signal, split it to lane 2, modify it with whatever changes you're going to make across device block settings for lane 2, and then bring that input, or rather output from lane 2, I should say, back to lane 1 and meld those two together. So the already continued signal chain output across lane 1 will be mixed with the output of what you have now modified from lane 2's splitter and mixer combo. And eventually you will then output the sum of both of those lanes together. So that's the two main selections that you have on the device if you long press and make this selection, okay? Also, if I was to take one of these devices and go to drag it, do you see already what's happened? Just in holding it here without even moving it down one, do you see how it's almost defaulting to trying to make that U shape? If I was to drag this device down and make this happen, now it's already created a splitter and a mixer right here. And the split is the signal at the very beginning and end. And if I go to make modifications to this, I can actually make changes to that splitter combo. By long pressing on the line that's now in row 2, I now have the ability to make different changes here for the splitter and the mixer. And you'll notice that S and M respective on the device itself, okay? Now I'm going to back up a tick and change that. Now I'm going to go over to Cortex control, and I want to show you. So far I've shown you 2 different ways you can create them, right? You can long press on lane 2, and by the way, that will work on lane 4 as well. The behavior is exactly the same, lane 2 to lane 4. Okay, it'll just be 1 and 3 respective of what you're going to be splitting and mixing. But also, you can drag a device block from lane 1 to lane 2, or from lane 3 to lane 4, and create a mixer automatically like that in that U shape, the one that's going to conjoin those splits and mixes at the end, right? Now, if we go over to Cortex control, there's a little bit of a difference here. So you actually have these bubbles that I've already kind of pointed out earlier that I was alluding to. What this means is I can create a splitter or mixer simply by tapping on one of these. So if I press that, I've now told the Cortex control and my Quad Cortex, hey, I want to create a splitter mixer here. Now you'll notice I actually have 4 selections of different shapes that I can use, okay? So you have 2 that I've just described to you, okay, and then you have 2 more at your disposal that you can make use of which you can go more towards the middle of the device blocks and be able to have this kind of like modified U shape. So the U shape before, it was taking the signal right at the beginning of this input, modifying it and bringing it right to the very end. So it would summate the input cleanly and the output cleanly, so you could make a completely different sound potentially out of the signal that you're catching at the beginning of lane 1 here, right? And then summating the two together at the very end for your output, whatever that was going to be. Now, if you were to select this one, okay, I'll just make this note. Now I can actually place this splitter and mixer wherever I would like within the signal chain here. So wherever I want to catch that processing, right, of that signal and be able to then modify it, this is where I place that. And the same goes for the mixer. Wherever I would like to place this is where I can go within lane 1, okay, in this shape. Let's look at that final shape that's provided here too. Let me just go back to be able to remove this entirely. And final shape, this. Okay, this is kind of an interesting one. So in this scenario, we're suggesting that we're going to capture our split signal here at the beginning of lane 2. And this is where technically you can assign a different input to lane 2. Okay, so in this scenario, if you don't want to capture something with lane 1, right, signal chain, you can create an entirely different input dedicated to lane 2, but then actually mix lane 2's results of whatever you're playing through on this input through this signal chain back into the resulting output of lane 1. This is where you can mix those things together. This might be a good example of where you might want to say, I don't know, like send vocals through, or maybe a secondary guitar or something similar, where you have input 1 designated to one guitar, input 2 designated to another, and then as you work out both of these guitar signals, you then are conjoining and sending them to front of house or something like that. This is a good way of which you could maybe do that. Might not be as clean as you'd like it, but there's lots of different scenarios like I've called out that you can make use of here. Let's go through a brief scenario of a configuration of a scene that I have here. That's going to show you being able to use with a guitar a stereo cabinet configuration. Okay, and I just want to the configuration is less what I'm worried about. It's more just being able to demonstrate the parameters and such, and that's what I want to get to eventually. But I want to paint a scene of a scenario so that way maybe you can understand this a little bit more clearly. Okay, so in this case, in preset 1 seat, right, scene G, I'm using a single amplifier that is got a splitter after that signal. So the first part of the signal chain, part A, is going to continue to flow through this row, okay? But we are splitting the input of what comes after this amplifier to not only continue to go down this flow of lane 3 until we reach this multi-out, but it's also splitting it to lane 4 here, where it can then traverse through this amp block, of which in this particular part of the scene is deactivated. And then ultimately as well, the cabinet that's here, okay? And both of these cabinets are the same, but they're mic'd differently with different levels, okay? So they have a different sound to them, different configurations, okay? And this is why you would, one of the scenarios why you would use splitters and mixers is to be able to make a stereo configuration. That's exactly what this is. It's going to create a stereo sound that is going to be eventually blended back together, because you see on lane 4, after you'd pass through this device block for the amp and the cab, our mixer comes back in after lane 3's amps and cabs, right? And that is going to summate the output of what you get out of lane 3 and what you've now created from lane 3's input split to lane 4 and then back up to lane 3 at the end here. So it's going to put these two together and make that happen. Now, if I transition to F, you'll notice I change things. Now it's stereo amplifiers and cabinets, bypassing this first singular amplifier that I had. And in this case, it creates an entirely different depth of sound. I can definitely tell you that. These are two different channels on the amplifiers. Obviously, the miking is different from what I just showed you. This is a very unique kind of configuration when it comes to what I wanted to be able to play with. Obviously, the Bang Goes Euro is the call out. But as you do this is a pretty classic way to be able to create a stereo cabinet effect. Okay, so let's take a look at our splitter and mixer configurations so I can step you through some of those and so that you can understand a little bit better about how to do this, okay? So I showed you how to create splitters and mixers. Now you're going to see them in action. I want to walk through some of these settings and things that you have to be able to choose from. So let's first start by looking at our splitter types, okay? You got 3 different types here: balance, AB, and crossover, okay? So balance is going to be a signal mix between the rows that you have. So in this case, it's going to be like a 50-50 split, you can think about it, of balancing that signal across the rest of lane 3, as well as what you're splitting that input signal of to lane 4. Okay, now if you use AB, that is going to be independent. So it's going to be independent configurations for each one. In this case, if you select AB, you can actually control the level or the gain, if you will, of that input signal that you're splitting. So say, for example, if I wanted to boost the signal going to the second chain here, the one that I'm splitting out to lane B, lane 4, which in this case is going to be B, okay, I could do that. So if I wanted to boost that signal up into that lane, I could do it. And at this point, now you'll have a plus 2 dB gain on the input that you're capturing from this splitter to this amplifier and cabinet combo, okay? And that's one of the main reasons why you would use this AB switch. You can also use it as a controller. So you can actually turn on and off this splitter by leveraging different combinations of scene controls as well. I could totally have it toggle so it turns them on and off. Okay, so there's a lot of different controls you can do with A, B as well. And then finally, crossover. Crossover is going to let you actually have the ability to cancel out independent frequencies. So if you want to cut those values out, right, you can change this frequency level. And at this point, it's going to cut everything that's below this value. Okay. And if I invert, it's going to be everything above this value, the frequency cut. Now, there's a couple different reasons why you might use this. And one of the common ones that I can think of is if you're a guitarist and you're trying to cut out some of your low frequencies for a splitter that you're sending through, and you just want to catch your mids or anything that's above a certain frequency to be able to kind of punch through even more than just using a pyramidal EQ or something similar. This is a way that you can do that. Okay, so there's a lot of different methods that you can use there. And you also have the ability to have controls of your stereo. Okay, so when you see normal and split, let's talk about what those mean. Okay, so when you're dealing with split, it's going to send the right inputs 2, return to USB inputs 6 or 8, and the splitter mixer path is all going to be split in that way. Okay, so it's basically going to take the right-hand side of those channels and drop them to that lane B, with all the left-hand channels going to lane A. So in this case, all of the things that are going to be playing through row 3 would be the left-sided channels, and all of the other even numbered channels are going to be sent across lane 4 as part of that splitter from level B. Okay, so that's where you're going to be working if you go into split mode. Normal mode is going to send both left and right, so stereo, okay, or potentially mono, but still playing the same thing in the left and right channels, right? And it's going to send all of that audio through both lanes, both splitter sides. So that means basically that everything that's going to traverse from here across in lane 3 for splitter A, if you will, is going to be left and right channeled, as will all of the output that is going to continue to traverse across lane 4, as long as you're using this. So if you're not doing a split and you're using normal, it's going to send everything that it's capturing from this input here of the signal chain through both sides of this the splitter, and ultimately that's what you're going to have returned back with your mixer. Okay, so that's your splitter settings. Let's take a look at our mixer settings and see what we have to choose from here. Okay, so in this case, you have both of your levels, okay, that you have coming through. And in this case, that's going to be your left and right, okay? And then you can take even further for each one of those inputs that you're having, you can pan them in different ways, okay? So if you wanted to get to the point where you're doing that, you can pan that rose configurational sound when you're using this view, as well as obviously you can boost what you're getting in that mixer. So what you're getting across from level A, okay, level A is going to be the continued signal that's passing through this mixer from this point in this row on, okay? Level B is going to be the output of what comes through these sets of device blocks that are ultimately making their way back up to this row 3 lane. Okay, so everything that's going to be capped with this sound is going to be a level B. Everything that continues to traverse the signal chain here is going to be level A. So your gain is going to be, level A's gain is going to be the continued gain that you're going to receive passing through from this cabinet through the rest of this row, okay, for this particular row 3. And level B is going to be the output control for level of what you're going to get when you get the output of row 4 back into row 3 where it meets at this mixer. Okay, obviously pan is just left, right, center. You can do however you'd like to be able to do with that. Phasing, I don't really think you'll probably use this all that much. There's different reasons as to why you would, but depending on the scenario, if you're sending, say, to physical speakers and you wanted to change and reverse the phase of the way that the sound is going to come through with the speaker. So in this case, a wavelength going like this, you can modify it so then it's going to be going the opposite direction, right? It'd be going like that instead of like this. I know it's kind of difficult to demonstrate. If you know what phasing means and how that works, you can change the phase of the sound going through the mixer. Okay, probably not something that most of you would use in common bedroom rocker scenarios, but there are definitely reasons why with physical speakers that you would want to be able to potentially do this, depending on how front of house is configured, monitors, in-ears, etc. Okay, obviously then the mixer level, the overall level of the mixer. So the overall volume of everything that's coming through the mixer can also be controlled. So if you want just an overall lift or a lowering of the levels that are going to be joined as the effort of having level A and level B conjoining together in that mixer, you can do that. So if this just becomes too loud, for example, say the summation of these two amplifiers is just, really starting to get clipping happening at your output, like you really don't want to do, right? Especially with a guitarist or doing something like that, then this is a way that you can lower both of those levels to kind of have an overall kind of drop in that dB. And then you can adjust from there how you need to be able to get it right to the edge of where your clip would be, but you're not going to actually clip with that configuration. Now I'd like to briefly take a look at the actual user manual for the Quad Cortex and walk you through a couple of the different scenarios that Neural has kind of called out for what they'd expect you to use as a general workflow with splitters and mixers, okay? In the first case that we're going to look at here, you're looking at dual row workflows. And this is basically what I've been showing you throughout the whole video so far is lane 2 complementing lane 1 with a splitter mixer and giving you a separate lane to work with, as well as lane 4 complementing lane 3 as a splitter mixer area where you can have more device blocks and modify the input signal that you're capturing from rows 1 and 3, right? And in this case, that's exactly what we're kind of calling out here. If we take a look at the preset that they kind of have in the image, what they're saying is you're looking at a preset of which you would consider maybe your vocals, your microphone, right, coming through rows 1 and 2, and then your guitar and cab is working through rows 3 and 4. So if you're working with a multi-instrumented band or a scenario where maybe you're a guitarist but you're also a singer, right, in a band or doing something like that, you can configure your own microphone in your presets and have those different things working as part of your general workflow. And in this case, that's exactly what they have going on here. So the vocal chain, let's take a look at vocal chain, which is going to be rows 1 and 2 working with this. Okay, the signal splits immediately after the compressor. So this is the compressor, okay? Then we have a splitter that we place here. All right. And they're calling out specifically that because of this, we're going to have a split in this signal that we're inputting. So we hit the compressor. The output of the compressor in lane 1 is going to continue down this path, but is also going to be split to level B, which is going to be row 2 here, and continue through these device blocks and eventually make their way back to row 1 via this mixer link. So B on the mixer is going to be the output of this row 2 after it's passed through these device blocks, okay? The splitter is going to use the balance type, so the signal is distributed to both rows equally. So as we've already called out with the different types of splitters that you can have, balance is going to basically mean that it's going to send the exact same level of signal across both layer A or level A here, which is going to be this continuation of the signal through the splitter, right, on row 1. And row 2 is going to be the same thing at a 50% split on level B of row 2 of the splitter. Okay, so here the mixer is going to go join rows 1 by. The mixer joins row 1 before the EQ. So as you see, here's the EQ block, and this is exactly where we're going to reach this. So what this is basically going to allow you to do with your vocals is once you've modified both of these and you're conjoining that signal back again, right, together. So you've got this envelope and a slight pitch shift that you're happening on the background of this secondary level. When you conjoin that signal back together with this original one, that's getting a little bit of delay and a little bit of reverb, right? You're then going to use this EQing block to EQ the summation of row 1 and row 2. And that's exactly what they're doing here in the vocal chain. In the guitar chain, so we'll step down here, our input is coming into here, right? We're going through a pedal, we're going through a compressor, again, we're going through what looks like, I believe, an amp block. And let me make sure what we're saying here. Yep, after the amplifier, we have a split, right? So we're splitting the signal after the amp, and we're setting it down to a couple of different modifiers where we're gonna do some EQing, a little bit of compression, right? And then we're sending out to send to on this scenario. So in this case, we're actually using this in a way where we're outputting to two different things. We're not going to summate the results of row 4 back into row 3. Instead, we're going to send straight to this other output, which in this case is going to be send to. Wherein the rest of the signal that's traversing across the splitter here is going to continue to flow through the rest of row 3 and then reach this output, send 1. Okay, in this case, let me see what kind they're using here. Do they call that out specifically? Yep, a splitter is an A-B, so the signal is sent to both rows with custom levels. So at this point, they could have customizations however they would want, right? So maybe they're doing a slight boost on the leveling back out to this row. Maybe they're dropping it some. I don't know. I don't know in this scenario, but that's what you could be doing in that case if you were making that happen. And maybe there's times where you certainly could potentially want to do that. Say if you have a tone that you want to distort a little bit more, right? Without using a distortion pedal or something similar, you could do that. Or if you have something that you know is going to have an effect because of a device block. Say this device block was actually going to add some gain, some unwanted gain potentially even that you have as a result of using an effect. You can also lower the input hotness, if you will, to that so you can gain the right effect that you want to be able to traverse through the rest of that row. So this is one of the examples of being able to use a dual row workflow. Now let's take a look at our final example, which is a 4-row workflow. As I mentioned, this can be a little bit challenging, right? It certainly gets complicated. It looks complicated. and I'll be honest with you, depending on your scenario and how you configure this, it can really be complicated. But also, I think it shows the ability to really get very in-depth with your configuration with some of these presets and scenes. And that's pretty awesome, right? Because you got a lot of flexibility to be able to allow for those scenarios to occur, which is really good. In this case, what you're going to see is a bit of a cheat in the way that you generally see your output, specifically with these row chains. So that way you can see basically having the signal start here and just continue all the way down to the end. So you never have another input. It's going to start here, snake its way all the way through each one of these rows to then finally make an output that's going to go to an actual source that you're going to have audibly listened to. Okay. And this is where this is how you can make that happen. So the biggest thing that you're going to notice here that I noticed right out of the jump is rows 1 and 3 that generally would have an output do not have one assigned. Okay. And the reason why they don't have one assigned is because if you do, it makes this almost impossible to be able to make happen, right? Because you're telling it to do things that are going to break your signal chain and going to send to an output eventually that you're not going to get input back to, unless maybe it's like a send receive or something like that for an effects loop. And even then, that doesn't really work in this scenario very well. So what you're going to see is we have our input that's traversing from in1 here at the beginning, traverse through a couple of these pedals, couple captures. I think this is a compressor. Splits, we get the balance. So the split just goes to the CQ to nothing. This is outputting to nothing. So this is going nowhere. It's just going to kind of die on the vine, if you will, where that is. However, the level B, right, is going to be on row 2 here with that split signal. So your signal is going to continue and it's going to branch to the beginning of row 2. And it's going to traverse through these different device blocks, right? Ultimately making its way all the way down to here at the end of the mixer, where you can make any adjustments you want to leveling and whatnot. If you need to boost, normalize, cut, whatever you're going to do to continue that through the chain, being that you've hit this main device blocks, you might have some flavoring to do, right? And then the output of row 2 is saying go to row 3. So that basically just means it's going to loop the output of what you would get out of here at the end of row 2 to the beginning of row 3. And if you see, the input selection is the previous row in this case. So this scenario is built specifically to allow for you to chain all 4 of these. And this is the only real times using this is going to be viable. Okay. So we say we're going to send to row 3, and then we say the input here on lane 3, row 3, if you will, is going to be previous row. So previous row is going to allow for you to catch this input that's coming out. And now, so we're having the continuation of the signal chain. So our output of that signal chain's inputs that we've had so far is going to be here to here. And we're going to continue to traverse through these device blocks all the way to the very end. And then we are going to say, okay, now we got another splitter. And again, level A of that splitter that would continue on through the rest of this row goes to nothing. So it's going to drop off. It's not going to be used. Level B is the only part of this splitter that we care about. Okay. And because of that, it's going to continue to take the signal chain's output and go to this last row here at the beginning of the row 4. And it's going to continue to traverse through a few more of these device blocks. Looks like a couple of reverbs, couple modulators, goes through to an EQ. And then finally we hit the end mixer, where you can do any final adjustments on the leveling and panning of that signal that you have, ultimately then outputting to outputs 1 and 2. So this is the only place with an output at the very end of row 4 where you're actually outputting to something that's audible. Otherwise, it's all internally switched and going through all these different paths to eventually get to that output. So your signal starts here, gets all of this processing occurring to then finally make an output at this level. One of the main things I want to call out here is you really need to be cognizant of your CPU levels on the device. Okay, so check out your CPU monitor as they call out in the book here. This is going to become vital. Having this many device blocks happening at the same time has the potential of pushing your CPU to its limits, especially when you're sending a lot of signal through it. Okay, now for the majority of the things that I see here with device blocks, I don't think a lot of these devices are going to cause those CPU spikes. Modulation, reverbs, delays, those types of things generally end up being, and amplifiers as well, generally end up being a little bit more of the CPU hungry things. And there's not that many of those devices on this this grid, which is good because that's going to mean that your CPU usage is probably going to be around 50, maybe 60%, somewhere in there, which is fine. That's okay. If you start reaching 85%, that's the sweet spot for me where I really start to get to be concerned. Okay. Now I'm a technological person to begin with. I understand CPU limits and bursting and how those processes can kind of work. So I know when I start reaching those higher end of those limits, you don't want to push much further because bursts can occur, right? A lot of things can happen in that processing, especially because even with some of the cores being dedicated to these effects, if you go making a lot of scene changes and doing things happening along the way too, that's added overhead that happens very briefly and frequently that's going to interrupt those CPUs as they're working on processing your signal through here. Not going to get too complicated with you on that. All I'm going to tell you is if you get your upper bounds a little bit too high on your CPU, you're going to start seeing a couple of things happen potentially, either clipping or latency. Audio latency is definitely something you never want to see. If you have introduced latency, that basically means you're going to have a lag. That's not good. Otherwise, you might have just a drop in the audio. And if that clips or just stops processing that audio for a moment as the processors catch up and then put it back out there, it's going to be hiccup. You're going to definitely notice that during a performance. So that's where you really want to make sure you're looking at that CPU monitor, checking out that performance, playing through an entire session of that track, and making sure that you're making all of the changes and adjustments in real time that you expect to play when you're playing in real time in front of people. That way you can make sure you've demoed this and it's working correctly as you expect it to. There you have it. Quick and dirty intro to using splitters and mixers on your Quad Cortex. There is a multitude of different reasons as to why you're going to use these. You'll definitely find yourself in different scenarios, especially if you're a gigging musician, where it's going to become vital for what you're going to be sending front of house versus in-ears versus monitors, etc., as well as different configurations for effects loops, other mixers, different instruments in general besides the guitar. There is so many different reasons as to why you would do this. And again, this is just a quick and dirty intro. I urge you to go look for other in-depth videos that are out there, and also check out the Quad Cortex manual. I'll be honest with you, it does a really good job of describing how these work in a nutshell. It kind of does that. But at any rate, I appreciate you coming. Please leave me any comments, questions in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.